Welcome to Unlocking Moves, where we're going to cover the key decision points and pivotal moments that really change the trajectory of successful entrepreneurs and leaders. And I want to hear their real life stories, not just the glory stories, but also the gory stories. Because as I like to say, the bigger the shit show, the bigger the lesson. Speaking of successful leaders, I can't wait to dive into the story of Jennifer Hill today. We're going to have a lot of fun. But before we get to that, Jennifer, I like to start off with throwing you off guard with an off-the-wall comment or question to really put you on your toes. You ready for this?
Let's do it.
All right, perfect. So we were introduced by our good friend Rod Kurtz, who wrote about you in 2014 with an article in Entrepreneur Magazine.
Yes, he did.
At the time, you were going back and forth from your New York City apartment to France, which is where your new gig was, with a toddler and a newborn in hand. And he wrote an article titled, How a Stylish Mompreneur Flies with a Toddler. First of all, are you effing crazy? And second of all, tell me one of the wildest stories you have about flying across the flipping ocean with a toddler.
I am. And to tell you how crazy I am, one of the many times I did it with my children when one was not even 2 and the other was a newborn, I was flying by myself between New York and London to then meet my husband, who's British, and his family. And as I get to the gate with this stroller and a toddler and a baby, there's, 5 different women came by. A couple of them said, good luck. 2 of them in Italian. And also said, you are completely crazy, because they were looking around for the other person to help and there was no one. So yes, it has been validated by airline passengers that doing that is absolutely nuts.
That's awesome. And I didn't mention, I will, you're also fluent in French and Spanish. Is that right?
Spanish. My French is not as fluent as I would like it to be, but okay. every year I aspire to improve it. But I will say I fooled my neighbors into thinking that I spoke better French than I did when we lived there.
Well, I've lived in Texas for 22 years, and every year I keep thinking that I want to get better at Spanish, and it's just doesn't seem to happen. So my guest today, as you've heard, is Jennifer Hill. She is a badass. She is a successful entrepreneur many times over. She's a founding member of Chief, the preeminent women's leadership organization, and she's a thought leader in cybersecurity and AI, and she's a recovering lawyer. Oh, we're going to have some fun today. Welcome to Unlocking Moves, Jennifer Hill.
Thank you so much for having me. I am delighted to be here.
Jennifer, your story is fascinating. You've got an undergrad from Stanford, an MBA from Northwestern, a law degree from Northwestern, and you went to work as as associate for a law firm coming out of college. How did you end up as an entrepreneur again?
This was in the late 90s. And so, of course, I heard many business plans for early internet businesses, B2B and B2C. And I found that I was so engaged with the students that I had. They were builders. They were interested in bringing things to the world that had never been there before. And I identified with them and their passion and their desire to create, and kind of stored that in the back of my brain. I knew that I wanted to go to law school and I would regret if I didn't go, but I also had to honor that side of me that really was a builder and liked to bring things into the world. So after many years of going in and out of law, working with entrepreneurial companies and venture capital firms, I finally had to admit to myself that I needed to be on the other side and give into it.
I know the feeling. I'm a recovering CPA myself. I was a bad CPA, so it made it easy to become an entrepreneur. I'm assuming, based on your pedigree, that you're a fantastic lawyer, but kudos to you for making the jump. And we're going to get into that story here in a bit. If you're just joining us on Unlocking Moves, today's episode is brought to you as usual by HireBetter, the strategic talent partner for growth-minded entrepreneurs everywhere. You've got to have some amazing stories along the way. Tell me about some of the surprises as you made that shift from law associate to entrepreneur and working in that entrepreneurial environment.
The first is that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, that information never leaves your brain. And that's a blessing and a curse. I remember the parent of a high school friend of mine who was a lawyer said, once you become a lawyer, it never leaves you. No matter what you do, no matter what else you engage in, it will always be there. And that's actually been a comfort and a benefit. So for example, being in very data-driven businesses, such as my last company, which was in healthcare analytics, having the framework for understanding what needs to be done from a regulatory perspective with data was a huge benefit, because it meant that things that seem like traditional hurdles for folks that don't have that background came much more easily to me and therefore to the team. So it gave us a leg up and it gave us an ability to develop things faster. On the other hand, once people find out you're a lawyer, everybody's got a question about everything. And I have to remind them, just because I went to law school and I practice at all these places does not mean I can get your cousin out of jail or I can get you out of a parking ticket. So kind of got to pick the topics that are relevant.
Dude, you don't know how much that resonates with me as a recovering and bad CPA. I get asked for tax questions all the time. I'm like, guys, I'm not a tax accountant. I'm not even a good accountant. So you don't want my help. I love that people are asking you for help getting their cousin Vinny out of jail.
Yeah, certainly parking tickets and getting your car towed, especially in the tri-state area. So I finally had to do some CLEs to learn that for myself.
So now you will do it for families and friends is what I just heard.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly. Okay. So you worked in an entrepreneurial environment. So you didn't start off as a CEO when you first joined one of these firms. Tell me a little bit about that journey and how you might have had to beat the lawyer out of you to become more, attuned to the entrepreneurial environment. That's the story I'm telling myself. Is that true or not?
I would say the lawyers never beat out of me. I'd say I'm pretty balanced in that regard.
Well, then how did you work in an entrepreneurial environment?
Yeah. So entrepreneurs are actually about minimizing risk and taking the right risk. And I think the assumption that lawyers get all the time, particularly recovering lawyers, is that we're these incredibly risk-averse people who can't possibly make a decision or do something that might not work out. And, like with anything, that could be true for many people, regardless of your background. But lawyers are actually into minimizing risk and taking the right risks. So the reason I think it was so much easier for me to transition is I'd had so much practice working with my clients, lots and lots and lots of tech-based startups, and helping their CEOs and founding teams go through decision frameworks on, do we release? What do? We have an unhappy client. We can't make payroll. There's an employment issue. All of these kinds of things and helping them think through the frameworks for that. So when I had to do it for myself and my own team, it was very familiar. And I also realized I've got plenty of ex-friends and colleagues I can call when I need a second opinion. And if I really feel like I need someone to play devil's advocate truly and give me the worst case scenario, it's frankly better to have somebody else think of that than yourself, because I've always been attuned to thinking of what is the best case scenario? What's the best thing that could happen? And when you balance that against the worst, you kind of realize that the best, hopefully, has a better chance of succeeding and your worst isn't as bad as you think it is. I remember reading a book about Colin Powell and him saying that if you're 40% sure, you should make the decision. And oftentimes people, regardless of their background, but especially entrepreneurs, have this period where they may wait before making a decision. And there's absolutely such thing as waiting too long. So I try to follow Colin Powell's guide and say, okay, if I'm 40% sure, I'm going to go for it. And I've gone through this is the best that can happen. And that's probably getting me super excited. And if the worst that can happen is no one's going to jail and there's not millions of dollars going out the window, then we're probably okay.
Well, I'm very familiar with the entrepreneur's attitude of what's the best that can happen, or just going for it, taking the leap and going for it. So I appreciate that perspective. My favorite phrase is, what's the worst that can happen? Meaning like, nothing, it's not going to kill you. Let's go do it. Take the risk. Okay. Exactly. So recently you were Remedy Healthcare. Is that right?
Remedy Analytics. Yes.
Remedy Analytics. Tell me a little bit about that, because it's in a really curious space. And I know you've had some success with Remedy Analytics. So tell me a little bit about that story.
If you'd asked me 10 years ago, would I be focused on healthcare and drug pricing? I would have looked at you as though you had three heads. But when I met the founder and the team, the passion they had behind reforming part of the healthcare system, particularly around access to drugs and drug pricing, was so fascinating that I couldn't help but be drawn in. And it's a privilege to have learned about this incredibly esoteric part of the healthcare system that even a lot of people who work in employee benefits and healthcare and insurance really don't understand. It's not until you kind of unravel all the different games and peel back the layers and you go, oh my gosh, like the way this happens is truly an American invention within the healthcare industry. And there's a lot of things that we can throw tech and data at to resolve it.
So Jennifer, I know with Remedy Analytics, you had an exit a couple of years ago, and then you went to work for a larger company, a public company. Can you tell me a little bit about making that transition from entrepreneurial environment to presumably more bureaucratic?
Sure. Well, it was having a lot of resources. So being able to see the company from its founding stage all the way up through the exit is amazing. It's every entrepreneur's dream to be able to see all of that and go through just all of the different highs and lows that are associated with it. I would say the biggest thing I learned and the biggest difference of going to a public company and it being so much bigger, I mean, the parent company at 11,000 people, is the access to resources and realizing, there's a person or a department for everything. And then learning how to access that. It really is a different way of thinking about your business, particularly when you need to plug it into something that's much, much bigger, that has its own culture and its own way of doing things, and certainly a way of doing things that, of course, has to be compliant with, federal and state securities law. So there's a lot to learn in order to sync those. And I think that education is actually really helpful, because whether, you stay an entrepreneur forever and you stay in smaller companies, it's so likely that your best partners or your customers are going to be these larger companies. Hopefully they are, because they have the budgets to afford you. So understanding how and why they make decisions, what the culture's like, what motivates the people, are really important skills to learn.
I like it. Well, it sounds like you're learning every step of the way, which is lifelong learning is a big part of who I am. So thank you for that.
Me too.
So can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now? I know that you've got a lot of expertise in the world of AI and even cybersecurity. Can you tell me a little bit about what your next project might be?
Sure. So I'm working on a few things, not all of which are public yet, but one that
We won't tell anybody. We won't tell anybody.
One that I'm super excited about is Thought River, which is the world's most accurate legal AI. It is a SaaS product. It's a company based in the UK, and I am serving as their board chair. So it's a great time to have a different role working and advising a growing company, particularly one that's growing both in Europe and in the US. And then working with a lot of entrepreneurs at the very early stage to kind of help them unlock their own moves and get to that next stage, whether it be funding or revenue goal or particular milestones, product development. So it's really fun to be able to play around with a bunch of different businesses that are in these neat areas.
I love it. I like working with a variety of businesses. It keeps me on my toes, keeps me fresh, and I get to make an impact across areas. So you know that I wrote a book called Who's Your Mike? A no bullshit guide to the people you'll meet on your entrepreneurial journey. I just happened to have a photo op. We'll a book there. I want to ask you, I know you've had a chance to read it. Tell me about who your favorite character in that book might be. Is it Mike? Is it Next Level Natalie? Is it Resume Ralph? What are your thoughts? And do you have any characters you want to add to the next version?
Oh my goodness. I have to say, I love your book, and it honestly needs to be required reading for all entrepreneurs, frankly, for anyone that's in a position of hiring, regardless of the size of the company, because you've captured these different archetypes of personalities in terms of the way that they interact at work really well. So it's really difficult just to pick one, but I have to say the one that has stood out, particularly for this last part of my journey over the last decade, is Resume Ralph. For a couple of reasons. I mean, one, at a healthcare analytics company, we had no shortage of people that were at ginormous organizations coming to us and wanting to work for us. And we absolutely had to go through a lot of these questions and self-evaluation that you mentioned in that section about someone having this incredible resume and this heft. Does it translate to rolling your sleeves up? We're a place where we literally are still making the coffee every day. We're washing our own dishes. We're doing incredible stuff with data and reverse engineering, challenges in the healthcare field. But it's a very humble and very hardworking group. And it can be a transition for folks that are used to having a team for absolutely everything, throwing data over the fence and getting it back, as opposed to having to pull it yourself. So it can be an adjustment. And that was what we had to really sniff out during the interview process.
I love it. And Resume Ralph has a great background, great, all entrepreneurs want to fall in love with that silver bullet. This guy used to work at Dell or with pharma, the biggest pharmaceutical company out there, the biggest healthcare system, whatever. And it, as Jennifer said, it doesn't translate. So
doesn't always translate.
Thank
but
you
so
for
useful,
that.
particularly then working in a much larger company and realizing that there's, so many more people with different skill sets that even though you're now part of the fold, you still got to explain, gosh, why do you guys do things this way? Well, we're a fraction of your size. So this is why we had to. And now, frankly, we have to learn to do things differently. And that's part of the education, which is also really useful too.
Awesome. Any characters you'd like to add? I always get funny ones like, you need to talk about personal problem Polly or, whatever. Any good ones you want to add?
I think there needs to be one about interns.
Really? Tell me more.
Yeah. So interns always sound like a great idea, particularly for small companies, because it's inexpensive labor that ideally has some type of domain knowledge. Often it's coding, or they may be really great at Excel or great at marketing, or, they're whizzes at social media. And the concept of, great, we're just going to bring them in and we're going to have them be themselves and we'll get tons of followers, or I'll get through all this backlog of work that I can't possibly do, is not always the case. It really depends on the person. And much like anyone else, when you onboard someone to an organization, particularly for a short period of time, you have to be really clear about the culture and expectations, but also realize that that person's lived experience is very different from people who've been in the working world all the time. And as any hiring manager, anyone who's managed an internship program can relate to, it's a lot of work in order to manage people to get the best out of them. So I think that when entrepreneurs especially are like, great, we're getting all this great labor for the summer, they really have to think, do they have the bandwidth? Do they have the patience? Do they even have just a culture that can help bring those people into the fold to get them to produce their best work that will ultimately help the company unlock moves?
It's funny. I found myself being that voice in your head that just said, "Hey, free interns, let's hire them." And I'm that guy, right? And then my team's like, "What the hell are we going to have them do, Kurt? They're going to be wasting our time." So
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're saying. So Jennifer, we're at the point of the show. It's called Unlocking Moves. I want to talk a little bit about yours. And again, the unlocking move is some key pivotal moment or transition point, some decision point, really changed the trajectory of your career, maybe even your life. Can you tell me a little bit about what yours might be and share a story?
Sure. So I would say leaving the law to start a company. Even though I said I love being a builder, I wanted to do that. You're still leaving a stable salary and a comfortable environment to do something absolutely completely new. And I was thrilled by it. And I think the thrill and the excitement goes a long way until you get to that first point of, oh, wait, there's no income coming in. Our revenue is low. I need to go out and raise money, all the things that are natural in the entrepreneurial journey. And I think sometimes when your enthusiasm, is so strong, it sustains you for a really long period of time. But you absolutely have those days where you look yourself in the mirror and you're like, what am I doing? I made my life harder for no paycheck and the promise of something better. But I'm glad that I did it because it reminded me that I needed to rely on myself. And, not that can't be done in stable employment or working for a larger company, but I think every individual has this experience where they're getting on to the next hardest thing for them. And that looks very different for every individual. And particularly if you're one who've had a lot of success or have been in more traditional environments, accounting, consulting, perhaps you've worked for big companies, doing anything that's kind of different makes you think more about your identity. And I think, being able to separate the person from the profession is very challenging. So amazing, though, to do for both your own personal and professional growth. I have a friend, Laurel Toby, who is a venture capitalist and also an entrepreneur. And she used to say many years ago that, people like to say they're running a startup was like being in the band, like, oh, I've got a band, like 30 years ago. And that always struck me that, you've got to be able to be doing it for the right reasons for yourself. And realize that your professional and your personal identity are two different things. And it all works out in the end. You just got to be you.
Well, I love the way your eyes lit up. You could hear the passion in your voice when you talked about that. So I'm excited for what you do next, because if you put that same type of passion into it, it's going to be successful.
Thank you.
So I have a question. Actually, what I like to do is I like to be the listener's advocate. If I'm going to have a conversation with Jennifer Hill, I've got a one-on-one opportunity to ask her a question, and I'm going to tie it in with what you just said. So you are a very successful entrepreneur many times over. You are a successful wife and mom, and you've been written about in freaking Entrepreneur Magazine for your ability to hold it all together as a mompreneur. So many of us parents can't get out of our freaking sweatpants during the day, but you're being written about in Entrepreneur Magazine. And again, you're traveling across the world with your toddler. First of all, how do you do it? And second of all, where are you failing?
Great question. Well, I'd say anyone who's a parent has days where absolutely everything in the world seems too overwhelming. And I absolutely have my share of those too. Still do. What gives me my energy are the things that are important to me in life. So the travel was something that my husband and I always enjoyed before we had kids. And it was important to be able to bring that experience. And we feel very fortunate that we can share that experience with our children, particularly at a young age. Just like anything else, it's about organization and planning. I had my lists. I checked them off. I had spreadsheets. I tried to make it as easy as possible. But when it got overwhelming, I would break it down into little pieces. I just need to get to the next thing. I just need to get to the airport. I just need to get on the plane. I'm not going to think about the other things or whether anyone sleeps or how many times people throw up. Hopefully not me. And just try to get to the next thing. Where I'm failing, I would say, are the expectations that I set on myself. And I think a lot of people, parents or not parents, entrepreneurs or not, we create expectations that are so high as to be unattainable. And being able to ratchet those down and realize we're still doing okay.
Man, I love that you said that. I think many of us beat ourselves up for our inability to be perfect. We are perfectly imperfect, and we need to accept that and I'm being honest, we need to accept it in our spouses or in our partners as well. And man, I love that you said that.
Yep.
You're not
My
perfect
husband
and
and I
don't
do
try to
things
be.
differently. Kids are healthy and happy, all good. We like to use mom and dad interchangeably. So if you need mom, dad will substitute and vice versa.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for sharing. I did also read somewhere about your spreadsheets that you kept things in order during those early days, especially. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay, Jennifer, tell me, you have any good stories from the early days? Anything that you'd like to share about some of your work as an entrepreneur, as a lawyer?
Yes, I got lots of those, but of the ones that I can share, when I was like a few years into my law practice, I got sent to Boston from New York to work at a startup that was in the process of getting sold, which, most of the company didn't know at the time. So, this random lawyer walks in and is sort of there to kind of take things over and help out the management team. So I was getting a lot of weird looks. I had my briefcase and I had my computer and I had all my papers and everything. And, I'm sure all they could think of was like, oh my God, what is this person? Are we in trouble? What's going on? And so after a long day, it was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon and I knew I had another 8 or 10 hours ahead of me. And so I asked two of the people I had just met, hey, where can I get a cup of coffee around here? Like, do you want to come with me and get it? And they just looked at me and were like, well, okay, I guess we should sort of give her a chance. But then they said, what, do you want to go to like some boutique coffee place? And I could tell they were fully judging, like especially fully judging the New York. And I said, well, this is Boston. There should be a Dunkin' Donuts on every corner, right? Which is actually my favorite, like fast food, quick coffee. And so we went down, I got the largest iced coffee. It was like an extra large and a donut. And suddenly it was like the clouds lifted. I was an acceptable human. There was no more stereotyping or anything like that. So we bonded over coffee and donuts, which was great. And actually, those two people became good friends of mine, which have lasted throughout the years. And Dunkin' Donuts became a regular part of our daily routine, which was really nice.
I love it. The way to bond with people who are adversarial is donuts and coffee, baby. That's
right.
One for the ages.
Always a good icebreaker in many situations.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. Jennifer, I like to leave the show with a hard-hitting question. And so here it is. It's, what is one question that you're never asked and you kind of wish you would be asked? Or, if I'm being fair, maybe you're glad they don't ever ask you.
Ooh, goodness. I would say there's probably two questions. One is, what books are you reading? And folks that sort of expect the answer to be lots and lots of business books are going to be disappointed to realize that I read a lot about parenting and, things like that. So, which I have learned actually quite a lot that applies to business, but that's probably for another topic in another show.
Yeah, nice.
That's one. And the other is, what motivates you? I often get asked what you do. Like, what is your success? People want to know what's your byline, as opposed to what motivates you. And I think that tells you more about the person you're talking to and what they're really interested in, as opposed to the professional labels that we're used to wearing.
I love that. Thank you for that. That's one I'll leave and maybe ask more often. What motivates you? I do have a follow-up question, however, on the book. What's your favorite parenting book?
Oh, my favorite parenting book. Oh my gosh. This one my kids would laugh about, but it's How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen, which I feel is perpetual. And in terms of setting expectations, my parents like to remind me that, your kids are 10 and 8. They're never going to clean the room as often as you expect them to, or put things away. And every time they hear them, fighting in the background or, really giving me a hard time, you could hear them just going, yes, payback.
That was always my parents' wish, is that our kids would, treat us and give us some of the same behavior that we gave them. So Jennifer, tell me, how else can we find more information about you or what you're working on next? LinkedIn, Twitter, what have you?
Yes, LinkedIn is absolutely the best place to find me. That's where I share everything that I'm doing and topics that I'm writing about.
And there's a lot of Jennifer Hills on LinkedIn. So tell me who you are on LinkedIn.
Easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. My handle is About Jennifer Hill, or you can type in Thought River, cybersecurity, AI, health tech, all those things will find this Jennifer Hill, as opposed to the thousands of others of us out there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And I look forward to connecting and staying in touch with you and seeing what you have next.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. I really enjoyed it and appreciate all the questions.
So Jennifer, on that note, we're going to wrap this puppy up. Please, everyone, go like and subscribe wherever you consume your podcasts, Apple or Spotify, and go check us out on YouTube for the video version. And if you would, do me a favor and throw a 5-star review out there. That'll help us keep our positive momentum with Unlocking Moves. And Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me today. You're an inspiration to entrepreneurs everywhere, and especially mompreneurs. So thank you for that, and keep it up.
Thank you for having me.
If you're an entrepreneur and you think you might have outgrown a member of your team, or maybe you've got a mic, as we talked about in Who's Your Mic, check out this quiz at who'syourmic.com/quiz. That's who'syourmic.com/quiz.